you can start, Audra, if you'd like.
Okay, so our first question will be, what is the danger and the opportunity cost of a board that is not engaged?
Well, there are lots of them, and unfortunately, many organizations experience boards that aren't fully engaged. The research shows up to 75% of nonprofits, you know, kind of go along without a properly engaged board. And I think the loss is in that the organization and the CEO especially don't really have a true thought partner in the board. They miss out on having really strong advocates in the community. And lastly, a lot of money is left on the table, as a properly engaged board can have a huge impact on fundraising.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, what are some solutions to creating a healthy, engaged board?
Well, I think in my experience, probably the biggest contributor to an engaged board is an executive director or a CEO who has the intention of engaging the board. We have really seen consistently that in that role, that person is really, really pivotal to a strong board, and to a board that performs well and is highly engaged. And I think a lot of CEOs and executive directors don't realize that that's actually a really big part of their job. We spent last Friday in 2 3-hour intensives with a group of CEOs and a small group of their board members, sort of their senior leadership. And I was honestly blown away at how fast, like in this 3-hour period, they were able to further cement their relationships and really gel as a team. And at the end of the intensives, CEOs were consistently saying how supported they felt, and the board was talking about and board members were talking about how enlightened they felt, like just finally being able to understand their role and what a true strong partnership could look like and the potential of that. So it doesn't have to be an arduous process. It just has to be well focused, I think, more than anything else. And again, really having that intention coming from the CEO is critical. So that, I think that's a big part of it in creating a strong board.
Okay, and who can help solve this challenge?
Well, obviously it doesn't work without the CEO wanting it, and the board chair and leadership on the board are really invaluable to helping shape the culture of the board, right? So it's really important to have allies that want to do this with the CEO. I think a very important committee is the board governance or board development committee, whichever committee is charged with creating a pipeline of potential board members. If you're doing this alone as a CEO, kind of figuring out who should be next on the board, I really encourage you to stop doing that and to find a way to engage board members around that function, because that in itself, is really an engaging kind of an activity. And in many ways, the future of the board lies in that activity. On Friday, we did an exercise where the CEO and board members developed a list of behavioral attributes that they ideally would want future board members and existing board members to have. So, we lots of times we talk about the skill set, right? Like we want a CPA and we want an attorney and we want, someone with this or that experience. But a lot of times we don't talk about behaviors, the behaviors that we want to see board members demonstrating, so they came up with things like collaborative, empathetic, forward thinking, active listening, a visionary, team player, all the the good stuff that often doesn't get talked about, right? Not explicitly. And so we encourage them really to go back and develop that with their full board. Like, these are, you know, the behavioral attributes that this board is striving for, like to really to define that. And then when you're interviewing candidates, definitely be talking about that, so people have an understanding of the expectations of behavior on that board, and can even, you know, hopefully give examples and demonstrate to you how they have some of those behavioral skills practiced and developed as well.
Okay, yeah, those are great to think about. So on the flip side, what have you seen not work?
Well, I would say not engaging board members between board meetings, that, you know, sort of keeping them at an arm's distance. It doesn't work. Spending way too much time, or really any time in board meetings, reporting out, right? So lots of executive directors and board members, I think, because they don't know what else to do, are wasting a lot of time reporting out, training people not to read, and sort of trying to justify their salary, which should not be necessary. And then not having working committees that, you know, have really been delegated a specific scope of work and authority to be able to do that, and handle important tasks, so that board meetings can really have the space and time for bigger strategic discussions. And I think the last thing I would say is meeting structures that allow some people's voices to really dominate, including sometimes that's the executive director's voice. And that just doesn't make for an engaged board, as we, you know, have sat in meetings and listened to people dominate the conversation. It's not fun for anybody.
Exactly. So how much time and financial resources are required by the CEO to really develop an engaged board that becomes the thought partner, advocate, and resource raiser?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, you know, in the case study that we wrote, interviewing Richard Gottlieb of Senior Services, who was really a master at board engagement. You know, that case study is called Rewriting the Rules, and you can download that on our website if you don't already have a copy. But when he estimated that ideally your CEO is spending at least 50% of their time engaging the board. And it's funny because when he retired, after we wrote that case study, he decided to sit on a bunch of boards. And then he came back and he said, no, it should be 75%, because he saw so much untapped opportunity within the boards he was sitting on. He also noticed that most CEOs and executive directors had no idea how to work with the board. And that discouraged him to the point where he got off a bunch of boards as well. So, you know, it's just a very interesting perspective. I think financially, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money, surprisingly, because the kind of results you can get from really engaging the board, you would think it might cost more. But, you know, things like annual trainings and self-evaluations, like an annual evaluation of the board, I think are really important best practices. An annual offsite retreat with the board, you know, facilitated by an outside person who's not on the board. So really all the board members and the executive director, they can all participate. I think that kind of activity can be a real game changer for the board. Something else that's, I think, worth investing in, you know, a lot of organizations have a strategic plan, but it's hard to answer the question, what is the board's role in that plan? You know, what's the board's plan to support the organization reaching its strategic goals? And that can also be extremely worthwhile, spending some time and energy in developing that, because once that's in place, then a lot of times the board can just finally, they know what they're doing and they can go and they can just really support the organization. But it typically doesn't happen just by itself by virtue of having a strategic plan. You know, watching a webinar, reading a book, those are great, but that typically is not going to get you where you need to go. It's just not enough.
Yeah, that's good to think about. What the risks associated with this work?
You know, I think probably the biggest risk is the CEO losing interest or giving up on trying to create an aligned, you know, engaged board. And also not realizing that if your board is not engaged to the point you want them to be, and that becomes a goal for you, there will be change. You know, change is going to happen. So you may have members whose time it is really they need to get off the board. It's no longer a good fit. And going through a process where you're developing board engagement, that's going to become apparent. You know, even if their term isn't up, it will become clear to everybody and to them probably that, you know, it's time to go. And it's not a bad thing because it creates space for more engaged board members to come on in, and for people who have been quietly sitting on the board waiting for somebody to figure out how to engage them, like they can really step in. I've seen that happen over and over again. You know, you may not have board terms, or you may ignore your board terms, right? So those are things that need to be addressed and handled sensitively. So they're, you know, in terms of risk, they need to be handled, you know, thoughtfully and with care. And I think finding a champion or two on your board that can help you like move through this process also reduces risk, like actually is essential, so that you're not trying to do it by yourself. So kind of developing those relationships one at a time as you go. And then working with an experienced consultant partner can help you see like the potential potholes and the risk to, you know, mitigate as you navigate kind of all the sensitivities associated with this. And that can help reduce risk as well, I would say.
Hey, that's great. Yeah, that really was enlightening. And so now is our time to open it up for questions.